So what we wanted to do today is just share our story, the goods and bads of it, but the realities of it. So today we want to talk a little bit about our siblings, give you a very brief overview of our story. Some of you know it, some of you don't. We'd like to look at the biblical mandate relating to parents and how to handle parents. The good doctor talked a little bit about Exodus, and I want to look not only at Exodus, but in Ecclesiastes and 1 Peter. I want to look at, next, Paulette and I wanted to talk about ways to follow these biblical mandates based on your words and your actions. And then we've come up with 5 categories of situations that relate to kind of our learnings of dealing with siblings. And maybe you have others that are similar, and maybe you have others that are quite different. But if we took a profile of our own siblings, I'm kind of thinking like, I need your help. So everybody that's in this room has to raise their hand just one time, and I won't ask you to do anything. But how many are just single children? No others, no siblings, just yourself. Raise your hand. Okay, couple. How many have themselves and one sibling? Okay, a lot of hands. So 2. Okay. How about 2 siblings? Wow. 3? Okay, 4? Wow. 5? Okay, those Europeans. 6? Wow. Wonderful. 7? Wow, I'm surprised. 8? So we go from just 1 to as many as 8. Amazing. Just think, I heard last week there are almost 100 people here. I don't know how many are here, but let's say that everybody comes from an average of, looks like in this class, 3 to 4 siblings. And let's imagine if for some reason, God's grace probably more than anything else, all of the siblings were invited and all of them came today to hear this talk. We'd have to obviously move out of this room, and we probably couldn't even fit everybody in the sanctuary because there could be 400, 500, 600 siblings in our room. Can you imagine that? But not only would there be a lot of them, but there'd be a lot of diversity. I'm thinking of different ways that you can split up the siblings. You can do it by age, or let's put all of the people that are firstborn over in this side, because there's misnomers that they're most likely the person that's going to be responsible for care. And we'll find out in the message today from Wayne that that's not necessarily the case. Or they might fall out based on gender, male versus female. That's an obvious way to split them. Or geography. Those that live local or near mom and dad versus those that don't. It's another way to split it up. A couple other ways might be just believers or not believers. If you have believing siblings or don't have them, that's another way to look at that. Or we could even say those that are caring or not caring, or those that are different or comfortable with talking to doctors and being in medical care situations. Or there could even be different circumstances. A lot of kids. They have a lot of kids, or a lot of their kids are in sports and they travel. So maybe they work on weekends. Who knows? But there are a lot of family circumstances. Some could be that they're biological versus blended. And then just imagine if we took that number of people, siblings, that we've split up in different ways, and probably said, let's break it out one more way. Let's add their spouses to the gathering. Well, these are all realities of what happens when you're dealing with your parents, because many of these factors are going to come into play. They've come into play in our cases. I am the oldest in my family. Paulette's not the oldest in her family. We're not local. Frankly, believe it or not, most of our siblings are local in Chicago. Some are as far as 2 blocks away and 15 minutes away versus 350 miles away. Some are believers and some are not. And there's just a lot of different factors that come into play, but one of the things that I think is important as we start contemplating and looking at our siblings and the role that they might play or you wish they would play is the fact that there's a lot of diversity. But what we have found out is a crisis typically brings out the real character of the siblings. Maybe you're going to be blended together. I asked somebody just the other day, how many of your siblings are on the same page And he said, all of them. And I was encouraged and impressed by that. Then I said, well, how many of them are equally providing care? And he said, me. And that could well be the case. Or if you brought all the siblings together in that other room, many of them might not want to even sit near each other because they're in conflict. Or there's something that happened in their lives that doesn't draw them close together. Or maybe their perceptions of their parents. You know, maybe they had a good situation versus you had a bad situation or vice versa. But our goal today is to talk about how do you try your best to keep the family intact during lots of diversity, during lots of personalities involved, and during times of crises. And that's what we want to talk about. Kind of what works well, what doesn't work well. Before we do that, though, let me just tell you a little bit about our story. Doug told you a little bit about us, and it was 1988 that we moved here. I still remember a family member, a relative, saying, how could you and Paulette consider moving 350, 400 miles away from mom and dad when they're in their 60s and 70s? Don't you think about them? And that hurt. But we were trying to make the best decision for our immediate family, which we thought we did. But that was a perception that kind of existed. I'm going to tell you about 3 crises that have happened and just a little bit about what happened and how that kind of unfolded. The first crisis was in 1996, almost 20 years ago. So when people ask me, how long have you been doing this trip back to Chicago? It's not because I'm a Cub fan or we have a condo there. It's because 20 years ago, Paulette's father was diagnosed with cancer. And the reality was then, who's going to circle around the family and start helping make decisions? Decisions like what hospital out of 75 hospitals in Chicago should we go to? What kind of doctors do we need to find? What are some of the options? Do we need second opinions and all of that? So that was our first situation. And he passed away 5 years later after a couple other situations with cancer. But that was our first real crisis in our family. And that was the first time that a new role kind of was put on our shoulders in terms of, okay, can you guys kind of take care of this? Can you take the lead role in these kinds of things? And there were a lot of procedures, a lot of doctor visits, a lot of phone calls, a lot of decisions to make. And it was also the start of making decisions about who's going to do what and when, especially when we're 350 miles away, and at that time we were both working. So one of the things we saw there is the fact that the decisions had to be made and had to be made in the best interest of my father-in-law and his wife and the family. And we found right away, right at the beginning, that each sibling responded in quite different ways. Maybe you can, I think you can relate to that because I see some head shaking. So that was our first crisis. And we look back at that and we'll look back to the love that we had for her father and the roles that we played. I know he felt I was a special son to him. He didn't have any sons. And I know Paulette felt special that she could be there and help in the way that she could, based on his name was Paul and her name was Paulette, so she was named after him. So we look back at that time, we look at it as a lot of hard decisions, a lot of times feeling alone, a lot of uncertainties, but at least goodness in terms of what we provided as care and love. Well, the second crisis happened a few years later. It was 2005. We call that our year of movement. So in this case, Paulette's mom had been in the home for 4 years after her husband passed away. And she told us at Christmas time in December of 2004, I've made a decision that I want to move out of the house and be somewhere else in the next year. And that caught us by surprise. That wasn't the Christmas present we were thinking we were going to get. Because what it meant is that starting in January, every weekend, literally every weekend for 6 months, we'd drive up there and we'd help go through things in the house. 35 years of goods in the house. And you can relate to that. A lot of you can, because I've talked to you about that. So we purged, threw things out. We gave many things away, both to family and to Goodwill and Catholic Charities and other organizations like that. And we kept some things. And in the meantime, we had to also start looking for where's the next place she's going to live in going to be. So all of those decisions were made during really the spring and the summer of 2005. It was her own decision to make, but we wanted to follow that and bless her with that situation. And it was clearly something she couldn't do alone. The good news is that summer came, and by the end of July, we moved her into her new condominium, which is now in the north side of Chicago instead of the south side of Chicago. And she was going to be a mile away from one of her daughters. And we felt good about that. So we celebrated the last week of July. And the first week of August, we got a phone call from my family and said, guess what? Dad's got to go in the hospital. He's going to be tested on some things. And he was tested with, and he was 90 years old at this time. He was tested as having a degenerative cervical spine that they couldn't do anything about. And the doctor, and we had a great doctor, as we had Dr. Chun, said basically two things. One is stairs are out of the future of his house in life, and the keys, car keys are going away. At least he made that decision. We didn't have to make that decision, fortunately. But the interesting thing is he knew that. And I think all along he was, to some extent, glad of the fact that somebody was taking the keys away from him. But what that meant is now the first week of August, they're going to put their house up for 40 years for sale, and we were going to have to repeat the same thing. Purge, give away, give to the family, or keep. And also find a new place for mom and dad to live. So it was in December of that year that we finally moved them into their place. And as that year ended, we looked back on that, we said, thank God that we made it through that year. It can't get worse. But in both situations, we found that there was a need for somebody to take lead of that whole situation. And almost in both situations, whether it was my in-laws or my family, we took the lead of that. And the response of the siblings was varied. Some helped, and some helped when they could, and some helped on weekends, and some helped on certain days, but there was various levels of care and various level of time commitments made for both. So we survived that. We were thankful to survive that. And the last three crises have all been just in the last couple years. In 2012, my dad had a stroke. My mom wound up in the hospital, and we basically decided we needed to move them from, they were in a retirement center, from independent living to assisted living. That was a key decision, and a decision that Paulette and I made almost one day driving up to Chicago and then trying to circle the family and saying, we really think we need to do this. Do you want to be part of that decision or do you not? Because at 3 o'clock today, we're getting a tour of the assisted living facility. You can be there if you want to. 2014, just a year ago, my mom, who has dementia, had multiple falls, and she wound up in the hospital. And before it was all over, she was there for 3 or 4 days. We put her in hospice care. And basically tried to circle the family together and say, okay, we need to make a decision. The hospice team have evaluated her. They think she qualifies for this. And we have to decide as a family if that's the decision we want to make. I still remember it was a Sunday night, and on Monday morning, the hospice team was going to come in and say, what's your decision? And I had to plead for my siblings to come to the hospital, which is a half hour away, at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night to sit and talk about this because I really wanted their input. And they were there, but they just wanted to, in a sense, follow what I was suggesting was going to happen, and came away with the situation that we really have a problem, don't we? And I said, I don't view this as a problem. I view this as an opportunity to do something that's going to help them. Lo and behold, my mom 3 months later, got out of hospice care. So once you get in hospice care, you don't have to stay. They said, you can graduate from it. And Paulette and I were on our long needed vacation in Naples, Florida, sitting out and having dinner one night and looking out at the beautiful ocean, and we get a phone call. And anytime I get a call from an 847 or 312, I kind of cringe a little bit. I know the likelihood of what's going on. And they call, well, this is the nurse in the hospice program. We want to tell you a little bit about my mom. And I figured, okay, this is the bad news coming. We're going to have to probably fly back to home and go to Chicago. But the good news was that she graduated. They didn't think she needed to be in hospice care. And here we are another year later, and she's doing okay. So my dad's 98, and his cognitive skills are stronger than mine. Seriously. He's in a wheelchair because of his degenerative back. My mom's 93, and she has dementia, which has been getting worse and worse. And Paulette's mom will be 93 at the end of this year. So let me tell you real quickly, and then we'll move on about just a couple of these situations. My mother-in-law, who, again, is 92 now, many of you know, if you know us, was very capable, not only in her cognitive skills, but she has had, up until January, 3 jobs. She bought a new car last summer. She reads the Wall Street Journal every day. And as much as we tried to slow her down a week and a half ago, she fell down a stair and broke her hip. Her worst nightmare. And we got a call, not the day it happened, but the following day, because the siblings didn't want us to lose any sleep over it that night. So we get a call at 6:30, 6:45 in the mornings, and guess what? Well, before the morning was over, we drove up there. There was going to be a surgery that day, and we wanted to meet the orthopedic surgeon and the anesthesiologist and the primary care physician, because we wanted to understand what was going on so we could communicate that to her, because she was distraught. My mom had been in the hospital the same week for a total of 2 weeks as she was trying to get her medication stabilized and not be as aggressive and assertive as she was in now a skilled nursing care place. So we had to move them, I didn't tell you that, in January, in the middle of January. Who wants to move anyone in the middle of January, let alone in Chicago? But we moved them, and what we found out in both situations is that we responded the way that we thought we needed to, and our siblings responded in a variety of different ways. Some totally uninvolved, some making a phone call from time to time, and some making a quick visit. And that's about the extent of it. So the last 10 years have been interesting for us, and even the last 20 years. But 2 things that I wanted to make real quickly, which is if we had to do it all over again, there isn't one thing we would have changed in terms of our own decisions. And many of you probably feel the same way. And secondly, all of our siblings responded in different ways than we had hoped or anticipated, and there's nothing we could do to change them. You know, even pleading with them. I still remember a call I had with my brother. My brother's 18 years younger than I, so I was in college when I had him. And yet, my parents responded to him and his life growing up in the same way that they did me. So it wasn't that they didn't invest their life in him, but you know, again, siblings are different, and they are what they are, and you can give them opportunities to do things, and I think you should instead of excluding them, but they'll respond different ways. So let's do this real quickly, and I will do this quickly. The doctor looked in Exodus, and I just want to make one reference to it. We all know the 10 Commandments, but I do think it's good to read verse 12. It says, honor your father and your mother so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. So I want to think a little bit about that. Honor means things like public esteem, great worth, high prize, something that one should care for, something that somebody should respect. Those are key words that we don't use in our vocabulary, I don't think, very often. And one of the things that I find interesting is we teach that to our children, don't we? I mean, I was reading a little book with my granddaughter, who's 2, just a few nights ago, on Joseph. And, you know, I was thinking of the fact that, yeah, we'll read about honor your parents, honor your father and your mother, and we think it's for little kids. And while it is, it's also for adult children, too. And one of the challenges that I want to put upon each of our hearts is the fact that, are we today ourselves still willing to honor our father and our mothers? The second one I think is an interesting one, because I do think it relates to siblings. If you got a minute, if you got your Bible, turn to Ecclesiastes 4, 7, and 12. 7 talks a little bit about, I saw something meaningless. There was a man all alone, no brother, no sister. There was no end to his toil. And he said, why am I toiling and what am I depriving myself? This too is meaningless. But then 9 through 12 really says something, I think, to my heart. 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. And even a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. I mean, I really think it talks a lot about companionship. It talks a lot about siblings in this situation. 2 is better than 1. 3 is better than 2. And there's some real benefits that come out of this, I believe. And it talks specifically about those. And it talks about, again, working together. Working together not alone, but trying to work together with the siblings as much as you can. And then just lastly, 1 Peter 2:12. It talks about live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. And where it talks about see good deeds, I think that means over a long period of time. It's not just a quick snapshot. It's over a long period of time they've seen these good deeds. So, again, I think even to those that are not believers, that's something important. I'm going to just go over real quickly the specific ways to follow the biblical mandate. One is by your words. I put a name of a book there called The Tribute by Dennis Rainey that somebody gave me. It's an interesting book relating to writing a tribute to your parents for what they did right. I mean, most of you might think of doing something like a eulogy at their funeral, but what good is it then when they don't hear that? So it's a book that if you haven't read or looked at, take a look at it. And then as it relates to actions, we've talked a lot about those already with the doctor, like staying in routine contact with your parents. I think that's an important thing. Show them that you want to really get involved in their life and express things to them. All of the things that the doctor just said. All of the paperwork, all of the decisions. Another thing that we suggest doing is to show that the family is important. We try to occasionally do a family gathering, a birthday, an anniversary, a holiday. And we invite everybody together. It doesn't mean everybody's always going to come, but one of the things that we have found out in both of our families' life is a gathering of the family brings the most joy to a parent. And even if it's for a short period of time, but we've just celebrated my mom's 93rd birthday with everybody in the family being there for an hour. And it was a special memory for her. And lastly, in terms of our actions, be their advocate. I like to use that word a lot. My daughter's a patient advocate at Children's Hospital in the hospice unit. She's a social worker. But she looks through the eyes of the patient and the family. And I think if you do that, my dad always says to Paulette and I, when you guys are here, everything gets done. You know, we're not here to go play bingo with mom so she can win $1.44. We're not here to, talk about the good old days, although that's an important thing to do. We want to be there and we want to say, what can we do to serve you today? What are your needs? What's on your mind? We spent a lot of time in this last week with Paulette's mom because she, again, a person who's very active, who's wondering about if she's going to ever walk again. And Paulette had some very intimate times with her, asking her questions. How you doing, Mom? And I spent the same time doing those same kinds of things, saying, what's on your mind today? And she talked a lot about those things. And she doesn't have anybody else to talk to about that. So let's just wrap up. So some practical things dealing with siblings. The first one I had is just handling expectations. My expectations and Paulette's expectations is that we'd get a lot more help than we did. And, probably you're going to see different expectations than what you might have thought of. Rarely, I think, is everybody on the same page and is everybody contributing at the same time. If you're in that situation, you're blessed. You really, truly are. The other things that we had is remember you're always serving your family, your parents, not your siblings. And I think that's an important perspective to have as you go there. And anticipate disappointments because you won't see things necessarily the same involvement or the same way that decisions are going to be made as might really have to happen. Handling roles and responsibilities. Well, one of the things we learned early is somebody has to take charge. Somebody has to be the go-to person. Even the doctor said that today. And like I said, I don't think it's always going to be based on gender or even family. Paulette's been as involved in helping me make decisions with my family as I've been involved in helping her family make decisions. Actions are diverse. There's so many things that have to be done. Many of the things were talked about today. Just to show you how good my dad's cognitive skills are, it wasn't until January of this year that I took over writing all of his checks and bills, because he could do that. But I talked to him in January, and I says, Dad, one of the things that I'd like to do for you now that I'm retired is kind of take that over, because I know you get a lot of bills and you get a lot of decisions and you get a lot of charities and all these things asking for your help. Would you mind if I take that over? And he's told me over and over again since then, that was a good decision. That's not on my mind anymore. So there's a lot of decisions. I know that there are geographical location considerations. So what we've tried to do is occasionally set up a time during maybe once a month to do a Sunday phone call where we do a conference call. And I think that's an important thing, especially in a crisis situation where there are things happening every day. And in that case, I asked my siblings to be available on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock at night. And we, in a half hour, talk through a lot of the things. And I know we do, and some of you do too, is create some kind of a newsletter or an update about mom and dad, or we send something to one sibling, but we always copy the other siblings. So they're at least aware of it, even though they might not be making any of the decisions. So it's something that you might want to think about. But one of the things that I think you'll find again is the fact that some siblings want to play a role, and some siblings don't want to play a role. And those are the realities of it. Third one, handling sibling considerations. Again, we're saying some of these things over again, but likely different responses. One of the things that we've tried to do is not say something, do something that creates a barrier to an ongoing or long-term relationship with one of them. And that's not only because some of our siblings are not believers, but we just don't want to create a barrier to that. So we don't express our judgments upon them. We talk about those things among ourselves. And yet, we do try to find whether or not there are opportunities to delegate a particular responsibility. If my sister, who lives 15 minutes from my parents, can stop at Walgreens or to the grocery store and pick up something and drop it off easier than I can. My brother, who's 15 minutes away, can take my dad to a place if there's a need to go to it easier than I can. So ask for, even if they're not involved, ask them to do some individual specific tasks and give them the opportunity to say yes or no to that. Just two more things. Keep your focus on your primary purpose in life. I think we would all agree that our purpose in life is to bring glory to God. And our body is a temple, and we want to reflect Christ in easy times and in hard times. One of the things we do is we pray for a servant's heart as we go up there. Matthew 20:28 talks a little bit about this. And create no bitterness to our siblings who aren't responding. And again, we want to be examples to those not only in the family, but those who even surround the family who might not be believers. And then hitting the finish line. One of the things we've learned is, as tired as we are and as frustrated as we get sometimes, Paulette said last night before we went to bed, are we really going up to Chicago today? By the way, we're leaving in 15 minutes to go up to Chicago because her mom has a first doctor visit with the orthopedic surgeon tomorrow. And we're going to find out if the screws that he put in her hip are working or not and x-rays are taken or not. And we feel like it is satisfying to her if we're there. So we're going to be up there for 2 days to do that. But there are many benefits and blessings to receive. Doug says to me sometimes, how can you do that? And yet I have some memories, and Paulette has some memories of situations that have happened in the last 20 years that none of my siblings have because they weren't there. Last Thursday, my mom got brought back from a hospital to her skilled nursing area, and I arranged in the course of a half hour for her to get her hair done because the hair place, the salon, was open till 3 o'clock, and I pleaded with them to stay open a little longer. So I took care of that. So when she got there, they took her off the litter, and I said, Mom, get in your wheelchair. We're going to go take a ride somewhere. We're going to get your hair done. And she was excited. Half hour later, my dad comes by and says, I couldn't sleep because I'm anxious for your mom to get back. And I said, well, she's back. She's in the beauty salon. So he wanted me to wheel him there so he could see her. And he goes, yoo-hoo. And they turn around and they get their two wheelchairs together and they kiss. They passionately kiss each other. And that's a memory I have that I will keep forever, that my siblings don't have because they weren't there. And Paulette could identify as many of those situations as we can. Lastly, or second to the last, consider doing this, establishing a legacy in your family. Paulette and I both saw families that were very generous in their time in their families. Paulette's dad would walk a mile or two every Sunday in south side of Chicago to visit his father and his mother. My parents would drive an hour every Sunday to visit my mom's mother, who was in a nursing home for about 10 years. We saw those things demonstrated. We went with them. And now what we hope is that it would allow our children to see the opportunities to serve parents. And frankly, we were blessed to see that 4 years ago today. Paulette was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, lymphoma. And within an hour and a half after I called the kids and said, Mom's in the hospital, we don't know what's going on, each of them said, we've talked to each other, we want to come by at 7 o'clock to pray over Mom, can we do that? And of course we said, sure. And for those 3 weeks she was in the hospital, they were there every day. We didn't ask them to be there. We didn't want them to feel compelled to be there. They didn't ask each other to be there. They elected to be there. And as we look back to those really challenging days, we look back to the blessing that we received already from our children and how they responded to the crises. And last, we want to bring a testimony to non-believers. So if we had to do it all over again, we'd do everything all over again. We don't know what the days ahead are going to be, but when you have parents that are in their mid-90s, we know that there's a medical crisis. When Wayne asked us to teach a Sunday school class last September, we said, well, we'll do it as long as, and of course the second week my mom wound up in the hospital or in hospice. So we were waiting last night, Doug, if we were going to get a call by saying, if it's an 847 or 312, should I answer it or not, but we would have. But anyways, those are our situations. I hope those help you a little bit. If you have questions in the days ahead or challenges, feel free to call Paulette and I at any time. We'd be happy to share those. But I don't know if there's time for questions or not. So. Well, we're going through that right now with Paulette's mom. So her twin sister, lives in Dallas, and they have a summer home in Michigan, so they're a little closer half of the year. And they've taken over all of the financial responsibilities. And we've taken over all of the medical responsibilities. And if there's something that falls out that doesn't meet there, then we don't wait for hands. We just basically either take it on ourselves or ask somebody if they can do that. Yeah, I took over the medical things in both situations, primarily because I was a medic in the Air Force Reserves. I've worked for 43 years until December with medical companies. I know a lot of medical procedures. I know how to talk to doctors. I actually am looking forward to meeting the orthopedic surgeon because we had a good old time when he was showing me all of the X-ray pictures of what he did and his proudness at 9 o'clock at night of what he did. So, and also the fact that my mother-in-law, in this case, is going there with a different perception. She's going there, at least she said last week. I'm going to find out on Monday, meaning tomorrow, if I can walk and if I can start walking. And I said, no. The decision is for 6 weeks you can't put any weight on your leg, the whole 6 weeks. And all this is going to show you is how that is healing, if it is healing. But for sure you got 4 more weeks. And then remember we talked about Plan B, which is what's going to happen once you can put weight on that. So we've had to explain things to them. Now there's a sibling that's 2 blocks away that volunteered to go to that, but we elected to go ourselves to be able to not only be there physically, but then to explain that. And I think, again, she's comfortable and thankful that we're willing to do that. So sometimes it relates to what decisions have to be made.